Point Blank is a crime fiction podcast. It may not be suitable for all listeners. We discuss violence in all its forms. The works we reference may include period slang, which some listeners may find offensive. The hosts also have a tendency to swear.
Episode 46, For a Song by Rodney Morales. Welcome back to Point Blank. My name's Kurt. Joining me as always, here's Justin.
Hello, reading people. Good to be back.
It is good to be back, Justin. I feel like I've got a little more energy this time around, and we've got a very good show, I think, ahead of you, or ahead of us today when we're talking about Hawaiian Noir and specifically For a Song. Are you ready to go back to the beach, Justin, and have a delicious drink in the sand?
Yeah, I'm ready to eat a bucket load of poi.
Well, I can go there. I don't know about poi, but there's a lot of food I found on my trip to Hawaii that I absolutely love, and we'll probably get to that a little bit later.
You know what I want? I want pog.
Oh, yes.
We would drink that by the gallon. I probably gained 30 pounds in pog weight.
I know. Pog. For if you don't know, folks, pog is passion fruit, orange, and guava juice, and it is delicious.
Yes.
And it works on its own. It works very well with rum. It's a treat.
It is. And they do a good job of setting up Hawaiian tourists to fall for pog and then make it unavailable in the States. So you must go back to drink it.
That's right. Especially when it's like $2 a gallon or something there. You know, it's like super cheap. So worth it. And I would almost think about flying back to Hawaii simply for the pog.
You are committed, locked in and committed to the juice.
You know, folks, we really do want to get into this Hawaiian Noir topic, but we as a podcast, we do have something serious here that we feel that we need to address. And this is the first time that Justin and I are recording since the world at this point really witnessed the police killing of George Floyd. And together we decided to, rather than having a full discussion on this, we wanted to read a statement that we both agreed upon. And Justin, do you want to read the statement or should I?
I'm happy to, but maybe we can both read it.
Sure. That sounds good.
We as hosts of this podcast feel we need to make a statement about current events. We stand, Kurt and I, with Black Lives Matter. We stand for justice for George Floyd. We stand for justice for all victims of abuse of power. While on this show we talk about fiction, crime fiction is rooted in the realities of our world. And real world problems are rarely as cleanly wrapped up as they are in a detective novel. Racism exists both within our society and our institutions. We as people can be better. We can do the work. We can reform or replace rotten institutions. We can make the world a better place for all of its citizens.
One small step we as lovers of books can do is to read a diversity of voices, to step into the shoes of characters unlike us, to understand where they come from. This fosters empathy and understanding. In our own very small way, that is one of the goals of this show. But having compassion for the struggles of others against oppressive institutions is not enough. As the Dalai Lama says, it is not enough to be compassionate. You must act. Read widely, connect what you read to the world around you, and take action against injustices everywhere. I'd like to say to our listeners that, you can go back into our backlog and I would especially recommend the episodes on authors like Chester Himes or Walter Mosley, or really any of our episodes that take place around the world, particularly the work of Wenka Braithwaite in Nigeria. That's what we're trying to do here. And you can disagree with some of the wording of what we may have just said, but if you disagree with the sentiment behind it, you can go find another crime fiction podcast to listen to, because this isn't the one for you.
You're here.
So, with that said, let's get to the more fun topic of talking about Hawaiian fiction, where we did, and I think after this statement, I think it's worth just saying at the forefront that when Justin and I first proposed this episode, we did so because we'd both gone to Hawaii recently. We were very interested in our visit. We wanted to talk about crime fiction from our trip. And at first, we struggled with finding work that was not just, and we'll get into this a little bit later, but not just beach fiction per se. You know, we wanted Hawaiian fiction, crime fiction written by people who grew up in Hawaii. And ultimately, we found some of that, and those are the voices that we want to share with you on today's program. So with that, we're gonna mix things up and change up our order a little bit. Justin, you all right with that?
Totally.
The show is different than our normal format just because of the way that we approach the topic. And we're going to start out with 5-round burst this time. And one of the reasons for that is to just take a look at some of the diversity of Hawaiian fiction right from the get-go. And then we'll move into our main topic for a song. We'll finish up the episode with our subject unknown talking about Hawaiian Noir. So, Justin, would you like to kick us off for 5-round burst?
Sure. 5-round burst is where we read approximately 5 books. This time it's going to be a little bit more. In approximately 5 minutes. This time it's going to be a little bit more. It usually is. And I'm going to start off with a book called Bolo Head Row. And this is written by Chris McKinney. This is an author you're going to hear a lot about in the next 2 shows. We're going to be doing a deep dive on one of his books in episode 47. And Kurt's going to read one of his works as well, or review one of his works in 5-round bursts. The reason being is he is a prolific author of noir fiction based in Honolulu. And as you'll see in my review, there's a good reason for that. So, Bolo Head Row was put out by Mutual Publishing in 2005. And it's a gritty noir set in Oahu. The guy we follow is named Charlie Kaweamoku, and I apologize if I butcher the pronunciation. My Hawaiian is weak. This guy, Charlie, he works at a dead-end job at the local ABC store and lives by a code of indifference. That's a sort of a feature of the novel, sort of a theme. He makes regular references to the Milton Bradley game Life. Do you remember playing that as a kid? He does, and he regularly refers to his own life and the dead ends that he runs into and the choices he's made as being sort of loosely a consequence or a reminder of that game. His mother owns a dive bar on Bolo Head Row in Honolulu. His brother Mark is a professional gamer and shut-in. He rarely leaves his house. And his sister Winnie is fresh out of prison. This is what gets the plot wheel really turning. Winnie gets released from prison, and there we go. We have a story. Will Winnie begin to live a clean and proper life, or will she dive head first back into her meth addiction? Take a guess what she chooses. And who is her new friend B? And why is Winnie suddenly flush with cash? These are the questions that we seek answers to, and we do get them ultimately. I love the commentary on Hawaii versus non-Hawaiian culture. This is something that's going to recur in a lot of our conversations about Hawaiian Noir. Also, the reoccurring questions about success, what it means to be successful, about family, family alliances and allegiances, and the question of addiction and the various ways one can be addicted. Though I would have liked a stronger arc for our protagonist, as his code of indifference can sometimes felt like aimlessness, ultimately I truly enjoyed reading this book and would read it again. I call it a clear-cut hit. Kurt.
Well, Justin, I think I'm going to follow that up with a review of another Chris McKinney book, and that is The Tattoo from 1999. This is published by Soho Press. And like the one that you read, this one definitely has a noirish feel to it. This entire tale takes place while Ken Hideyoshi is in prison at a correctional institute in Hawaii. While inside, he's having this tattoo done by his mute cellmate named Cal. And we sort of go back and forth between Cal and Ken's experience in prison and Ken telling Cal his life story. And, why is he doing this? Well, because the other prisoners sort of suggest because Cal is mute, he sort of acts as almost a therapist in a way, because he can't tell other people your problems. I guess the idea of writing it down is sort of overlooked, but we can brush that aside for the purposes of this story. He tells his life story, which starts with him growing up in poverty as a Hawaiian of Japanese ancestry And basically, he goes through his childhood, the problems that he has, the conflicts he has, his close friendship with a man who is Native Hawaiian, and the community. Even though you're on this relatively small island, there can be very distinct communities within it. And his escape from that community, his moving from, I think, the windward side into Honolulu, and how that changes, and he gets into this life of crime, but that kind of gray area of crime. It's definitely crime, but he's more of like a bouncer or a collections guy, that kind of level of crime. And of course, since it is a noir tale, things spiral out of control, and a lot of the conflict in this really hinges around issues of family, and in family in that extended sense of community as well. I think McKinney handles the ideas of the racial tensions within Hawaii, both within the different communities, whether that be Japanese, Korean immigrants, newly arrived immigrants, or people who are Hawaiian who have been there for generations, the Native Hawaiians, and then of course the Haoles who have come in from the white people who've come in from the mainland. So this is really a powerfully written story that covers a lot of important issues that are as relevant today as when it was written. And for me, this one is a hit. It's a solid handling of complex issues. Kind of like in your review, there's a few little stumbling parts in the novel. It is a first novel, so I'm kind of taking that into account. But I think if you're looking to dip into truly Hawaiian noir fiction, The Tattoo by Chris McKinney is a surefire win. So that's a hit.
That's good to hear. I intend to read The Tattoo next in terms of McKinney books. I think we're doing a pretty nice arc of McKinney in the next two episodes. The Tattoo is one of his first books, if not his first. Bowlowhead Row is written in the middle. It came out a few years after The Tattoo. And in episode 47, we're doing a deep dive into Yakidoshi, Age of Calamity, which came out in the mid-aughts. I think 2015 or something like that. So those readers who are interested in Chris McKinney, want to check out his work, we suggest you read Yakidoshi first, because we're going to be talking about it in our next episode. But these other two are very good as well.
I was a little vague on some of the issues in The Tattoo because he covers a lot of the same territory in Yakidoshi.
Good point. Yeah, I think there's some thematic overlap in his writing. I've noted that. So, moving away from McKinney for a little bit, I'm going to talk a little bit about a book that I came across. It's a weird one. It's called Repo Shark, and it's written by Cody Goodfellow. And before we had identified the books we wanted to review for this podcast, we were struggling to figure out if there was any Native Hawaiian noir literature out there that would be worthy of us spending time with. And we were lucky enough to have a listener, Scott Kakawa, reach out to us from Hawaii and offer us some suggestions that we took up. And we're so grateful for Scott for reaching out to us, because it helped change the trajectory of our show and give us, a direction that like the kind that we were seeking. But prior to that, this was one of the considerations for our main feature, because it's a fun book. It's a weird book, this book called Repo Shark. However, Cody Goodfellow is not a Native Hawaiian, and we did not want to make that mistake again of doing a book by somebody who wasn't from the ground. So we're going to give it a review here in 5-round burst. This came out in 2014, put out by Broken River Books. And we are introduced to our protagonist, Zeph DeGroot, as he's auto-filleting himself in a Las Vegas motel room. This is page 1, so you know what you're getting yourself into.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a mix of noir and horror and straight up bizarro fiction. There's a motorcycle theft and a trip to Hawaii that Zeph takes to recover the bike, because he's a professional repo man. And the bike is actually the bike that was one of the bikes that was used in the classic 1960s motorcycle film. The bike that was used in Easy Rider, one of those bikes. So it's this prize that needs to be recovered. Anyway, there's a drug kingpin in Oahu named Dani Punani, who may also be a shark god. There's tons of drugs and sex and witchcraft, overwrought violence, like total pulp fiction violence, but also weird mythologies, including some rooted in Hawaii and Polynesian culture, history, cultural lore, straight up horror scenes, and noir with a mystery to boot. This is one bizarre cocktail, and it's one I can barely explain in any coherent fashion. It's really a book that's worth reading to uncover what the hell is happening. It ends with a grandiose shootout scene. There's a lot of surfing. It's a crazy fucking book. I recommend it just for that, but I wouldn't have recommended it as fully as I do had I not thought that Cody took serious effort to study and research Hawaii and Hawaii culture and Hawaii history, because there's a lot of stuff in here. It's a dense book with a lot of cool backstory, a lot of references to the past, a lot of references to Hawaiian culture that feel as if he took Hawaii seriously and wasn't just some ex-PI from Detroit coming out there and drinking Mai Tais and pretending he knows the islands. Overall, this novel, it just works. It might not be for you if you're not really into main characters who auto-fellate themselves, but if you can, if you can handle that, it's a worthy read. If you want to get weird, have some terrifying times in Maui and Oahu, I would check out Repo Shark. Kurt, did you read that one?
Well, no, it is sitting on my shelf. I haven't got to it yet, but when I'm in the mood to get weird, this sounds like the perfect book for me.
I think you'll like it.
Yeah, it does sound like something I would probably enjoy. So I'm glad to hear your review of it. That is a sometimes dangerous genre to dip your toe into, because sometimes it just doesn't. Well, most of the time it just doesn't work very well. But I'm glad to hear this one does. Next up for me, and first of all, I know this is breaking up our 5-round burst already, but you brought up Scott, and I also have to just give Scott a big thank you. We are going to talk about his book as a featured review next episode, but and that's Kona Wins. But Scott, we couldn't done the episodes that we're about to do without your help. So next up, I actually have a comic book, and I'm not fully done with this series, but I think there's 4 collected, like trade paperbacks of this, and this is Hawaiian Dick. This is written by B. Clay Moore. The one I read was illustrated by Stephen Griffin, and this is from Image Comics. And this sort of is... I hesitate to call this tiki noir. Let's call it tropical noir. But this takes place in the 1950s, so it has a lot of those themes. We have a war veteran detective by the name of Bird. He was a detective on a police detective on the mainland. He gets into some trouble that we don't know about. He ends up in Hawaii because his good friend Mo is a detective with the police in Honolulu, and he's a native Hawaiian and Samoan guy and they became friends during World War II. So that's why he's in Hawaii. And his campaigns or problems that come up in the comic book series always have a twist of sort of the paranormal. There's a lot of crime that you might expect in a 1950s comic, but there's always a bit of this Hawaiian myth and folklore wrapped into the story. And I think the art's pretty good. I mean, I'm no expert on Hawaiian myths and legends, but it has an authentic feel to it. Like you were saying about Cody Goodfellow, it feels like the author and the illustrator have done some homework before they put this on the page, which is certainly appreciated. So if you're looking for a comic book tale, and this definitely has that like hard-boiled feel, but with, like I said, with that paranormal superstition angle to it, that's Hawaiian Dick, and there are a series of these comics to check out.
Thanks. I think somebody on our Facebook page recommended that when we were seeking Hawaiian recommendations, and I made a note of it. I did not purchase it or read it, but I'm glad that you did.
It looked interesting to me. So yeah, I would call that one a hit.
Cool. So my last review for this round is The House Without a Key, a Charlie Chan mystery by Earl Dare Biggers. This is a classic. You might call it a golden age classic. I would not call it hard-boiled noir, but it is one of the first mystery books written that set in Hawaii, We're talking 1925 here, the era of Dash Hammett wandering around the streets of San Francisco trying to hone his chops at Black Mask. So this goes back pretty far. This is the first book in the series that brought Charlie Chan, the fictional detective, to light, and it feels like a first book. I think Biggers is still trying to get a foothold on what kind of story he's telling. Now, here's the deal. Charlie Chan is a Chinese detective, Chinese American, I guess, but at this time, Hawaii is still a territory, and the story is set in Honolulu. And what happens is, Charlie Chan is not the main character. He doesn't even come in until about a third of the way through the book, as the detective once a murder happens on the islands. But the story is really more about rich white people who come from the mainland on a boat. There's some crime, there's a theft, there's a conspiracy. Ultimately, there's a murder, a single murder. So if you're looking for piles of bodies, this isn't the book for you. I feel a little bit like it's a locked door mystery, and the locked door is Hawaii, or the limited space is Hawaii.
Sure.
Ultimately, I think it's well written in the style of maybe an Agatha Christie book or something further back, even dating back to the 19th century. But I don't care much for rich white people drama, and this novel is so far from hard-boiled that it's a hard sell for me. I did enjoy getting a sense of what Hawaii looked like in the 1920s. It felt sort of like Hawaii now, except for, cars and other things and massive development in the big city. But it still had, I don't know. I was surprised by how modernized it seemed to be at the time that the book was written. That being said, there are some semi-racist portrayals in this book, and it just felt like a book written by colonials for colonials. And I don't dig that. But it's a cool historical record, and it's worth checking out if you're into understanding where mystery came from and how we handled Hawaii in the past, and even sometimes do today. The one cool thing about this novel, which I'm not calling a hit, is that the main character, Charlie Chan, is based off a real life detective, a Chinese detective operating in Honolulu in the 1910s. And his name was Chang Apana. And this guy was written about in the paper. He was clever, solved a lot of crimes. And while Earl Durr Biggers was in Hawaii, read about him and was inspired to model his own detective off this character. The cool connection between this and our featured book, For a Song, is that the main character in For a Song, who goes by David Kawika Apana, is said to be, in the book, the grandkid or a distant relation to Chang Apana. So that's the connection.
Yeah, I noticed that too when we were reading For a Song, and I thought that was a nice connection. I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, I sort of brought it all together. So what next for us? Do you have another one?
Well, I have one I know that we both read and we both don't recommend, and I'm just going to say just a few words about that. That's Ritual of the Savage. This is by Jay Strongman. Came out in 2015 by Hungry Eye Press, which actually seems to be a self-published press, but whatever. This covers this. We found this when we were kind of looking for, I guess you would say, a 1950s sort of style noir book taking place in Hawaii. This one's in 1958. We have Johnny Davis, who's a down on his luck private eye. He gets a missing persons case. It sort of tries to invoke the 1950s era of tiki and that vibe. There's some CIA mind control drugs involved. And frankly, for me, this one is just it missed the whole damn pineapple. So I would not recommend Ritual of the Savage.
Me either.
Okay, well, we can leave it at that. Oh, did you have any more reviews for today?
No, I'm good. There was such a plethora of Hawaiian reading that I'm giving you all I can, and
okay.
So yeah, well, I'm ready for the deep dive into For a Song.
Well, before we get there, Justin, let me give our listeners just two more books that are not crime fiction, but I would read them before my recent trip to Hawaii to get a little bit more background on both Hawaii and Polynesia. And if you're, or Polynesians, I should say. And just because I enjoyed both books, I want to mention them to our listeners. And the first one is The Last Atoll, Exploring Hawaii's Endangered Ecosystems by Pamela Frierson. And I would recommend this one because it is about current environmental issues, but it also delves fairly deeply into environmental history and specifically how the U.S. military has used some of the outlying islands for bases, for target practice, for spotting stations, for all of those things. And it touches on both the environmental consequences and cultural consequences of using those spaces as military bases. So that's The Last Atoll. And then the other one, and this is a broader history, but this is about the history of the Polynesian people. This is called Sea People, The Puzzle of Polynesia by Christina Thompson. This is a very interesting history that looks at the history of Polynesians from two opposing viewpoints. The history of how European historians have looked at Polynesians and how Polynesians themselves have looked at their own history. And ultimately, over time, how those two ways of seeing their history have I don't want to say converged, but have unveiled a better history of the Polynesian people. And it's particularly interesting to me because, as we all know, or should know at this point, the ancient Polynesians were seafarers of the greatest degree. I mean, they traveled thousands of miles across open ocean in canoes and did so successfully for a very long time. And this gets into that story, and it's a great cultural background of really all of the people of Polynesia, and a unique history and a way of looking at things that I hadn't read before. So that's Sea People.
Cool. If I took a canoe 1,000 miles across the Pacific Ocean, I would probably drown.
So would I, Justin. So would I. All right, so we're going to move into our main topic for a song by Rodney Morales.
All right, so I do have a brief, I hope, review or commentary or plot summary. And I will say this was a fun discovery. This is a long book. It's 500 pages, which always scares the hell out of me when I get that in the mail. And it's a daunting read for somebody who reads often and has to read a lot. I love 200 pages. It's just nice and easy, and I can knock it out in a couple days. So I place higher demands on books that are 500 pages. I have expectations that better wow me, or I'm going to be cranky and bitter at about page 350. I will say this. I enjoyed this book from start to finish. I enjoyed it. I felt that Rodney Morales kept my attention and kept the complexity of the book and kept the grittiness of the book engaged all the way through. So my hat's off to him. It's hard to do, especially with a genre book. And so I'll start with that. But let me tell you a little bit about this book. For a Song by Rodney Morales was published by the University of Hawaii Press in 2016. As I said, it's a longer novel, and it features a Chinese-Hawaiian private investigator named David, quote-unquote, Kawika Apana. The novel opens with Detective Apana winning a boat in a hand of poker. I figured at this point that we were going to be locked into a long novel about a detective with a gambling addiction, but that's not the case. That's not how it turns out. Perhaps his gambling somehow gets channeled into his detective work, but it is one thread that it's a bit of a red herring just to start the book off. So, Apana specializes in missing persons, infidelity, child custody, and other cases. He's been established as a detective for a while, but that's not his first career. His first career was as a journalist, so you get that kind of backstory. He's not coming from the police department. He's coming from journalism, which is cool. Now that he's a boat owner, he lives at the Alawai Boat Harbor in Honolulu. And at first I thought this was merely a nod to John D. MacDonald, our favorite author. But it turns out to be integral to the plot as we dive deeper into the novel. Now, what is the plot? Missing person case. Classic. A young woman has disappeared. Where has she gone? More importantly, why? The novel is broken into 5 parts. This helps with the length. When I say this thing is long, I mean it. I've said this before, so I'm not going to be redundant. But like I said, it reads fairly quickly. On day 1, we meet a femme fatale style character. She's not quite a femme fatale, but her name is Minerva Alter. Comes and meets David at his boat in search of help. It's her daughter who's gone missing. Her daughter's name is Caroline, quote-unquote, K. Johnson. She's the daughter of the late Leno Johnson, we learn. Leno is a notorious character of local lore who was shot dead on a Chinatown street over 2 decades prior. That case never went to trial. It's an ongoing mystery, or maybe call it a cold case. But as we dive deeper into this current case, that one recurs or sort of bubbles up to the surface as well. With the help of Kay's friend Mia, David Apana begins the long journey towards solving this case. It takes him all over the place, all over Oahu, all over Honolulu, the city, out to the island of Hawaii. It's a very dense book. There's a lot of thickness to it, but the layers are not shallow themselves. They feel like each layer has a complexity all its own. Over the course of the investigation, Apana meets folks including a variety of cops, union folks, local troublemakers, politicians, stage actors, triathletes, undercover feds, not to mention the wealthy Kiwi sailor who helps him with his investigation. Most of these characters are nicely developed and interesting. A lot of these longer noir stories, you end up getting a few characters that just feel like cardboard cutouts. I didn't get that impression very often in this book, and that's a testament to Morales' attention span and commitment to his characters. As I said, this is a dense book, but not one that bores. Characters are well drawn. Setting is richly alive. If you want to see Hawaii in the context of a noir fiction book, this is a good book to get you started. This isn't in the same vein as Chris McKinney taking us into seedy Skid Row style streets for the majority of the time. We are all over the place, all walks of life, and seeing Hawaii from the beaches and surf culture to the inner city and crime, and also even boat culture, which I'm sure that Kurt will speak to, the mariner's life. I'm curious to know if they handle boats correctly. So I'm sure you'll have something to say on that. So I think I enjoyed the leisurely pace of this. Once I realized I had to be in for the long haul with this 500 pager, I appreciated that Morales held my hand through it, keeping me interested, but without trying to rush or push me too fast through the story or through the plot. I think I get a good sense of Hawaii, and I think that Morales is a fair and honest tour guide. All in all, I think Morales does a terrific job capturing contemporary Hawaii, Honolulu, and Oahu in particular, as complex and gritty places beyond the familiar sun-soaked shores of Waikiki. I think he captures race and class tensions, as well as tensions of local versus non-local, and Hawaii as an autonomous space versus Hawaii as a colony or subservient to U.S. power. There's a lot of stuff going on in this plot, and I just didn't feel like trying to explain it all in this summary. If you want to read this book, folks, and I think you should, you'll realize what I'm talking about. There's a lot of shit going on. So we'll talk about that later on. But I'm going to give this, I wanted almost to give this a real high rating, but I think there's a couple reasons why I'm not going to. I'm going to give it a 4.25, a strong rating, a very clear mark of approval. And I'll be curious to know, Kurt, what you thought of this book.
Yeah, well, Justin, I can't really disagree with your assessment. I feel that this, for me, is a very strong 4. And I think it's, there's a few things that hold it back from being a 5. But this is a strong example of a traditional-based detective novel set in Hawaii. And I think you really couldn't go wrong if that's what you're looking for. Like you said, the size of it is a little daunting. I was a little, as you were, put off by that at first, but I'm glad that it delivered. And I think what Morales has done here is delivered one of these examples of using a lot of tried and true elements of a detective novel, but blending it in a very skillful way and deftly adding in the local context to that story. And for that reason, it works very good. Now, there is a lot of complexity here. And if sometimes that works, most of the time that works to the book's benefit, occasionally it does not. And that's, one of the small things that's holding it back from that 5-star rating. And I think also, and I don't want to give this away, but I did think that the ending was satisfying, but it was lacking a little bit to it. But overall, For a Song really was what I was hoping to find in a more traditional detective story set in Hawaii, written by somebody from Hawaii. And it balances extremely nicely with the work of McKinney, because here we have a little more traditional, and with McKinney, we have a little bit more hard-boiled and noirish type stories. So a great parallel of authors to look at for these 2 episodes on Hawaii.
I would agree with that. I feel like reading them as a duo is perfect. You get the length and the density and the complexity with Morales, but with McKinney, I mean, the novel we're reviewing in the next episode comes in at 186 pages, and it's focused. It's not overly complex. You meet all the characters within the first 20 pages, and you just see how it all plays out. And it's very hard-boiled and very much anti-heroic. Whereas this character, as we'll talk about in a moment, David Apana, he's more in the tradition of the heroic knight of Raymond Chandler.
Yes.
Speaking of that, do you want to do a run-through of some of the characters and discuss some of the ones that we liked most?
Sure. Let's do that. We do have a ton of characters in this.
Way too many. I started to write down all the names and write down little notes on each one. And then toward the end of my list, I just have blanks. I was like, I don't know, just another good guy or another bad guy. So,
yeah, I also have to say here, folks, that I always want a hard copy of the book for our main topic. And because of COVID and my work schedule, I could not get a hard copy. And taking notes on a e-reader for these main topic books is it's not a very good option. So if I forget something, I'm going to blame it on that. But yeah, we do have a long list of characters here. Do you want to start with our main character, or do you want to start off with some of the side characters?
I think we should start off with David. He takes us through the whole book. We're with him the entire time. He's our POV character. I have a line from the book that sort of establishes how he talks about himself.
Hit us with it.
Sure, I will. This is a first-person narrative, so we're with the detective. So we better like him or we better love hating him. And in this case, I'd say he's a likable narrator. Like I said, in the tradition of the knight, I think he believes in heroism, and I think Rodney Morales was trying to evoke a heroic character, not a perfect character, but somebody who aspires to be quote unquote good. So this is what David Apana says about himself briefly. I knew my storyline, disillusioned, some say disgraced news reporter who reinvents himself as a private eye, an obsolete profession if there ever was one, divorced, not quite ready for another relationship. Yet, in less than 24 hours, he's encountered 2 women, one older, one younger, who remind him that maybe he's missing something. So this is the setup for this guy. He's not in the best of places in his life. We get a sense of his background. We know where he's been. And we also see a future, a possibility, something he yearns for. And I think this is a pretty classic setup, but I think it's very clearly articulated by Morales. What did you think of David Kawika Apana as our main narrator and character?
Well, I liked him. I think that, again, this speaks to that deft hand of the writer here, is that I think we're given a lot of somewhat, stereotypical ideas of what our detective might be, a little down on his luck, etc. But he propels that forward in a very good way. So we actually care about this main character. I love private detectives who are former journalists. I think that's a good character to use because it does a number of things. One, it gives them a lot of connections both within the police, the government, the community, and possibly the criminal underworld. But it also gives us a character who is not just or usually not just a character who can bust a door down and come in punching. Yeah. It's not a character whose first thought is not the violence end of things, but the informational part of it. And I think for a story like this, that works extremely well. I love that Apana has the local connections. He has the local history, and he's also a great vehicle to meet that cross section of people who live in Hawaii because he knows this. He grew up there. He did his work. You know, he knows all of these people, and I really enjoy seeing the things through his eyes in that regard. I really can't think of a downside of this character. I pretty much liked him all the way around.
Yeah, I like the relationships he has. I like his past relationships. I like Morales doesn't oversell him as pathetic, doesn't oversell him as articulate or some kind of boy genius or some kind of cerebral superstar. He's just somebody who's persistent, has a good head on his shoulders, and has a fire in him that he's seeking to understand both himself, the world around him, but also his past and his former mistakes. As I mentioned, Lino Johnson, this old cold case that gets dug up again, that was upon his case. That was something that he tried to figure out back in the day. And it turns out as this novel develops, he realizes mistakes he made, things that he missed, and he's able to put some pieces together as he learns new things. And I like when I see characters who realize it and reflect on their past and know how to make adjustments in a thoughtful way. So yeah, I really, as a main character, he's great. He's a pleasure to be with.
Yeah, and I don't want to really give this away. He leaves his job in journalism for, let's say, a fairly noble reason. I like that some of the relationships that he has throughout the book. What's the bartender's name at
Sal? His old cop friend?
Yeah. And how he's another kind of guy who had a falling out, I guess you could say, for standing up for a moral reason.
I actually have a quote from the book about Sal. If you want to, let's talk about Sal a bit.
Sure, go ahead.
So Sal's this guy. We run into him a few times. He sort of serves as maybe a mentor or a friend in terms of the character trope. They talk about stuff now. They talk about the past. They gave each other advice. They sort of back each other up. Anyway, this is what Morales writes about Sal. A few years ago, he had been isolated, thoroughly burned by his work for the Criminal Investigation Squad. It started when he turned down an obvious bribe, then learned that his fellow officers depended on bribes the way waitresses and bartenders counted on the tip jar. When he found evidence of large-scale corruption, when he learned that just about everyone on the elite squad was on the take or connected in some way to the criminal world, he took what he had to internal affairs. Instead of getting results, he found himself getting weird looks. The matter stalled. Frustrated, he turned to the FBI. This led to some firings and court cases, but things got worse for Saul. He was harassed, hounded, shot at, and blackballed. We find this out at about the 40% mark, and we just have a good sense of this guy and why he's a bartender. We didn't quite know until this point. So this is upon his old friend, and they're peas in a pod in a certain sense.
Yes. Yeah. And I like that element, the peas in a pod. I mean, even if it was something else that brought them together, I like when our main detective or protagonist has this little troop of misfits, I guess, to work with this way. So he also has a friend who is a reporter who's sort of still reporting, but has to be very careful about what he writes. And I liked how he plays on that to get some information. So yeah, this whole, and also let's talk about the Sperry brothers. Can we mention that?
Oh yeah, let's go for it.
I wanted more from the Sperry brothers. So these two guys are Hawaiian toughs, Curtis and Joe Sperry, and they used to work as muscle, I guess, for Lino Johnson. It's all kind of left a little bit vague, like they definitely have a criminal past, but exactly what they've done is kind of sketchy.
Yeah, it was mysterious. I agree.
And sort of in that line of, well, was it really as bad as the news reporters or the police said it was, or whatever. But anyway, these two brothers who look almost identical, even though they're a year apart, like they have this connection to Lino Johnson. They have a connection to the missing woman, Kay Johnson, Lino's daughter. And at least Joe certainly has a protective element he sort of wants to help upon in some way during this case. But the other great history about this is these two guys used to be professional wrestlers at one point, which I thought was a fun little touch.
Sure.
And also an interesting hint to Hawaiian culture, because in that same time frame, that was a very big wrestling was a big thing in Hawaii in the 70s. So just a little odd side fact there, but something I noticed. So yeah, I like those two characters. They don't show up a whole lot, but what did you think of them, Justin?
I like them. I forgot to write them down, so they didn't stand out in my mind to the same extent that they did for you. But now when you talk about them, I remember them. And I guess maybe as you said, they were a little bit underdeveloped given how richly developed so many of these characters are or how clearly drawn they are. Maybe we could have had more Sperry Brothers without it hurting and maybe even improving the book. They seemed maybe a little bit less dimensional than they could have been.
Let me bring up an element of this plot that I thought maybe did take up a little bit too much of the page, and let me think let me get your reaction to that. And that is this whole issue around the director Gerard Plutkin.
Yeah, the theater guy.
Yes. Do we want to say that he ends up dead? I mean, I think.
Somebody's got to die in this book, and he's one of the first. Yeah. So he's not too much of a spoiler.
Sure. It is interesting how this element of the play is woven into the plot, but did you feel like that was maybe a little bit too much of the considering how this novel ends? Do you think there was a little too much time spent on that?
Yeah, I remember going back and rereading it and flipping through pages and finding that we're still in the theater. Like David Apana goes to this theater to watch this play. He's going there to meet with the director. He's gotten some insider tips. He needs to talk to some people. But he watches the play. The play's described. He hangs out at the intermission. He goes back in. We watch more of the play. And as my editor brain was like, I think we could have summarized this. Do we really need this type of intricate explanation? And, obviously the play is serving as metaphor and some clues come out of it. Like stuff comes out of it. It's not empty. But yeah, I mean, did we need all of that? I didn't.
And it's really considering the quality of this book, it's a relatively minor gripe. But I mean, I think if I were to perhaps put some criticism into the book, that would be one of the things I would say, well, that we really need to spend that much time there.
Sure. But Gerard, he's one of the early meetups as David works through this case, and he doesn't last long. And this gets turned back on David. All of a sudden, David has to cover his tracks, make it not be known that he was the last person to see Gerard alive. Is he being set up? Who's setting him up? And you can feel the squeeze. You can feel the tension rising. So it's a key moment in the plot. But I feel like I don't have as much to say on Gerard as much as some of the female characters, particularly Mia. I feel like we need to get to know and talk about her a little more because she's essentially she's the co-star in this book through most of it before disappearing in the act 3.
Yeah, that's true. And that's maybe another criticism here is that other than Mia, our female characters are relatively they're not on the page very much.
No.
But let's talk about Mia. Here we have a young woman who's a triathlete. She's hooked up with, well, it's kind of ambiguous whether or not she's having a relationship with this Hollywood director, but she has some connections to Hollywood and acting and that sort of thing.
The purpose of her, the reason she's in the novel is that she's a friend of Kay Johnson, the missing girl, the missing woman. And so she becomes a point of contact for Apana. And where she's staying in she's pretty much like house sitting for the director, right?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, she has her own place, so that isn't exclusively what she's doing, but that's how Apana finds her, is she's house sitting.
And she's an exercise enthusiast. They're all tied to this acting, this theater world. There's just so many damn layers in this book. I'm like, why are they triathletes? And why are they also in the theater? And why are we tied to police corruption? And there's so many things happening that I understand why this had to be 500 pages. But sometimes when I was reading, I was just like, oh my God, another layer. But what did we like about Mia? I enjoyed her exuberance, her vibrant character. She's a character who pushes. She's athletic, and David Apana is not. He's in the doldrums of middle age, and he, divorcee and out of shape, smoking cigarettes, not really capable in the ways that he might have been as a younger person. And she pushes him. She's like, she makes him jog. If she wants, if he wants information from her, she's gonna push him to exercise with her. She falls into her interest in the case because she's close with Kay. She knows things. She's a little bit of a femme fatale. We don't really know what's up her sleeve or not. Is she on the up and up, or is she hiding stuff? And we don't really get a good sense of that for the first half of the book. But how do you think that that Morales did a good job sort of teasing out her character and presenting her?
I do think he handled that pretty well. I think the way that he had her very slowly reveal the information that she knew kept us interested in her and kept us wondering, okay, well, how exactly is she involved here? And as you said, at least for the first, well, actually more than the first half of the novel, we really don't know what that answer is. No. And I won't give that to you here, listeners, but it is worth finding out on your own.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, this is what I said about leisurely pace. This is an example of that. For 250 pages, we're just slowly, it's like a dripping out information between, it's just such a slow burn between her and Apana. And there's some sexual tension, there's competitiveness, there's curiosity, but somehow Morales keeps me interested. I'm like, okay, I got enough. I'm ready for more, but I'm willing to wait until 30 pages later for my next little bit, my little piece of cheese.
Yeah, no, that's a good way to put it. No, I think that works, and I think it leaves us and this is again where I think Morales has done such a good job using some of the standards in crime fiction, and then just subtly playing with them a little bit to keep us kind of expecting something and wondering what that's going to be. And I think in her case, that's is she the femme fatale or is she not? And that works out well, I think, in the case of this book. Another writer would have handled it quite differently, and I think it speaks to Morales' skill in how he handled it in this book.
That brings me to maybe before we start talking about some of the bad guys and talking about Ryan, the Kiwi sailboat man.
Yeah.
I want to just briefly mention what Kay Johnson's about. What do we learn about the missing woman Kay? What does she do? What's her life like, and why? What are the many ways or reasons we might think she's missing? Eventually, obviously, we find out why. But along the route, there's a variety of directions and red herrings. She's an actress or aspiring actress. She's an activist. We learned that she is like sweatshop stuff.
Yeah. She's been engaged in anti-sweatshop activism and including making a documentary, I believe.
She's a firebrand. She learned some things and got pissed off, and so she might be ruffling the feathers of the bigwigs, the power players in Hawaii and beyond. And obviously, this could be a reason for her disappearing. She's also the daughter of Leno Johnson, and he's an old crime guy, so there's that angle. There's the fact that she went out with her, and there's a boyfriend involved too, Matt Serrano, that he's like Mr. Awesome at everything kind of guy. And they went out to Arizona. They met some important players in Las Vegas. What's going on with that? So there's a lot of threads laid out, and we don't know, obviously, until later on in the book which threads are the ones that we need to pull to unravel the whole thing.
Yeah, that's for sure, because we do have a lot of different possible angles on this one. You haven't even spoken about the underage prostitution element involved, or I think there was even a hint of a land development and some other issues going on as well.
I think Rodney Morales thought that if he has to write one book about Hawaii, he's going to cover every fucking base he can. And he did. And usually that's a disaster, but somehow he made it work.
Yeah, I would agree. Definitely works to the plot's benefit rather than takes away from it in this case.
True. What about our bad guys? Who are these? Should we do bad guys, or should we talk about Mr. Sailboat?
Let's talk about bad guys. Let's do that.
There's Kamana. He's like the local Hawaii, like big. He's a local Democrat, but like system Democrat. He's part of the machine. been around for a while, big wig politician, probably snaps his fingers and he has a bunch of lapdogs. And there's a lot of questions throughout the book about whether or not he's on the up and up or whether he's doing some behind the scenes. He's a politician. He's doing behind the scenes shit. But, that's one big bad guy. But how does he relate to Leno Johnson? How does he relate to Kay and various other schemes and the land deals and the prostitution and the stuff happening in the Mariana Islands, which we're not even, just whatever. But it's also his friends or the people he's associated with. There's pictures that come out. There's evidence of associations. There's the guy named Blankenship, and there's a guy named Jerry Herblock. There's the directors, and I don't know. I'm already lost. Do you have any clarification for how these people played out and whether or not you think Morales developed these bad guys in a way that worked for you?
Well, I think he did, and I think it's hard for us to say a whole lot about them. As you say, you're already kind of lost because I think what he's doing there is not so much. It's not so much about the individual here. It's about sort of a system-based group of bad guys.
Yeah, this is systemic corruption. This is the stuff that modern social movements are calling out currently in the streets of the United States. Deep systemic corruption or systems that have been in place for so long that people don't even see how rotten they are. That becomes very clear as this book unravels how everything's connected.
Yes. So in a way, it's not really necessary to have a huge differentiation between the various bad guys other than to sort of show that they play their role in the different elements or institutions of society, whether that be land development or politics or banking or what have you. And we also don't actually, we hear them referenced a lot, but we don't actually see them on, personally on the page all that much.
That's true.
So the development of them as characters is mostly having facts about them revealed. And I think that works for this book. I think it works for the way that this investigation goes. And it's also interesting because in a way, it also provides this network of people to possibly provide for a sequel in the book.
Yeah, that's true. That leaves Ryan, the New Zealand sailboat guy who has a boat in the same harbor or in the same whatever pier as my terminology is terrible as Apana. Apana doesn't. He won this boat on page 1 or whatever in the first chapter, but he doesn't know how to use a boat. He's not a seacraft guy. So this Ryan guy sort of hops over and becomes his buddy, his boat buddy. Is that accurate?
Yeah, sure.
Early on. Is that official mariner terminology, boat buddies?
For the purposes of this podcast, sure, we'll say that.
Okay. What do you think of Ryan? Did they have a good buddy chemistry?
Yeah, I think they did. And I think how that friendship or alliance or however you want to put it plays out, it does work. Do we just come out and say here what Ryan's connection is, or
I don't know. I feel like that might be a little too much.
Okay.
I don't know. I'm not. I mean, obviously he plays a role. He's not strictly boat buddy. He has another role, but I don't know. I enjoyed that reveal, but essentially he serves a plot point of he teaches. He goes with Apana in his boat, and they go to Hawaii, the island of Hawaii, for a triathlon at some point in the novel, and that helps. Once in Hawaii, the island, Apana uncovers some other things and meets some other people, and the conspiracy deepens, and he gets some more information. But I thought that was played all right. Was it essential? I don't know. I sort of felt like Morales was bored with Oahu, so he wanted to get us out to another island for a little while. But
yeah, I think there's a little bit of
that. We can do a spoiler alert, and then like an official announcement, and then we can talk about them.
I mean, I don't know if it's necessary that we need to, because like you said, I enjoyed the reveal of what Ryan's true purpose is, and I think that is worth keeping that under wraps. But the fact, I think it is clear from fairly early on in the book that that Ryan is not everything that he seems at first. I think that's fair to say. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that. And that's par for the course in a book like this. Mia's the same way. All these characters, you never, except for the big bads, you get told essentially what they're up to eventually. But with these other characters, who do you trust? Who does Apana put his faith in? Well, we can't trust anybody except maybe his old cop buddy Saul, who's a lot like him. So that's part of the fun of the ride.
Yeah, and that's Ryan is a great example of that in the book, as well as a lot of these characters are what their actual alliance is held to the chest until fairly close to the end. But yeah, no, I think Ryan's a very interesting character. I think it also is perhaps wise of a author, if you don't want to write a lot of nautical scenes but you want to have a boat in it, is have your narrator not know anything about boats, and then no matter what no matter what they say, if they say something wrong, you don't have to worry about it.
How would you how would you rate the nautical terminology knowledge and usage in this book?
Low, but that's okay because it's not really necessary for the plot. I mean, yes, he lives on a boat. Yes, they take the boat to the big island of Hawaii. Is there a lot of need for technical jargon and all of that? No, not really.
Yeah. We're just talking about the characters at this point. We haven't even talked about, we've hinted at, but haven't talked in great deal about plot or theme or writer's craft, historical context. So we don't have that much time left. So what I want to say is I felt this book had good dialogue, great description, maybe too overstuffed with plot. But if you have good dialogue and good description and three-dimensional characters, I'm willing to be overstuffed. It's when those things are weak that being overstuffed just feels like terrible editing. So I feel like the commentary in this book on Oahu, on class and wealth and just Hawaiian culture, the web of intrigue with double agents and secret identities and red herrings. There was a lot to love in this book, and I would recommend it to anybody who has any interest in Hawaiian noir, wants to understand Hawaii, but also read a real good piece of crime fiction. There was a lot I loved about this. There are some issues that are tied to the length, tied to maybe a couple characters and a couple scenes that just went over long, but overall, we can talk about the ending if we want. I don't really want to spoil it, but you said that you felt like the ending was a little flat.
Yeah, and I think I'll just leave it at that because I don't think it spoils the book. I just think we were given so much detail throughout the book that it kind of wrapped up a little too quickly for me, I guess.
Sure.
But like a lot of what you just said, I completely agree. I think that there's a lot to get out of this book. I think, again, we were looking for an example of crime fiction set in Hawaii from a native or a Hawaii born in Hawaii author, and that's exactly what we got. So I'm very pleased with that. I know that Morales has a strong. He's a professor, creative writing professor in Hawaii. I know Morales's background is he's part Native Hawaiian, Japanese, he's Caucasian, and Puerto Rican. Hawaii is a real melting pot of cultures, and I think that comes through in this book. And then, of course, that creates both wonderful elements of culture, but it also creates conflict, and I think that comes through in this book as well. As a scholar, Morales, he is a professor of creative writing at the University of Hawaii. He's been very interested in the period 1970s Hawaiian Renaissance movement. And it's also interesting that he uses activist type characters in this story because that's what some of his other writing is about. And he has a book on the tribute to George Helm and Kimo Mitchell, who died during some activism on, I forget the name of the island, but it was this island the U.S. military was using as a bombing range, and Hawaiians wanted it back. And they died while trying to transit between the island and one of the bigger islands. But he has a whole book on that. He has a whole detective novel on that disappearance.
That's interesting.
Yeah, and that's something I would really, really like to read. But I think our author's connection to this very interesting period, which was touched on in both of the books that I recommended about Hawaiian Polynesian history, is this Hawaiian Renaissance period, and it's really a great, it's a great example of reconnecting with culture. And we have to remember that, like, when we talk about Hawaii, we're talking about a state. It became a state in the time frame that there's still people alive who remember Hawaii not being a state.
Yeah, yeah, 1959. That's well after World War II was over. We have you may have relatives out there who know a time when Hawaii was a territory, and statehood was challenged. Statehood wasn't a consensus, and there were some practical reasons for statehood, but there's still a very strong patriotic anti-U.S. Hawaiian movement for secession, or at least for sovereignty. And that stuff was there then. It's there now, and these clashes and these tensions are very much under the surface, and sometimes not even under the surface.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And we can talk about that more maybe in a different portion of the show. But I just think Morales is definitely connected to these things, and I think that comes through in his fiction, and the fiction is stronger for that. So
I agree.
I don't think I have a lot more to say for Forest Song, but I do highly recommend it, and I think it's a great book.
I do too. Let's spend a little more time talking about Hawaii Noir generally before we wrap up in Subject Unknown.
Subject unknown.
All right, so in this Subject Unknown, we're gonna try to keep this brief, because really this is the theme of both episodes. But we're going to talk a little bit about Hawaiian Noir, and I think for the purpose of this, I think we're going to just maybe keep this conversation as to why Justin and I were interested in Hawaiian Noir and the challenges that we had looking at this episode, because I think that does, it is a relevant conversation, and it's a little bit behind the scenes look at how we look at an episode as well. But Justin, do you want to start us off on that conversation?
Sure. In December 2019, I went to Hawaii for Christmas for the holidays with my partner, and it was my first time to Hawaii, to Polynesia, my first time to any place west of California, and it was lovely and whatever. It was a vacation. I had a good time. I read one of the Charlie Chan novels while I was there. I was trying to, at that point, figure out what kind of crime fiction scene was going on there. And, I was struggling to find stuff that wasn't beachcomber detective mysteries from, ex-cops from Detroit or whatever. And I knew that Kurt was going to be going to Hawaii in March. It was literally the last trip he took before the COVID-19 crisis really hit the fan. So we were like, well, obviously this is a great opportunity. Maybe we'll try to figure out or unwrap Hawaii Noir, what's going on with that. And this was also, we spent some time in San Francisco. Some of you might remember a couple years ago we did the Kirk Hammett, the guitarist for Metallica. No, Dash Hammett's little walking tour, doing that whole memory lane thing. But we also went to some tiki bars. It just, got drunk and had fun. And I was like, well, what's going on with this there's a whole little thing called Tiki Noir and all that tiki culture. And I wanted to try to figure that out. And I realized, we can't really do an episode that focuses on that, because so much of that's just total colonizer appropriation stuff. And while the drinks might be fun, it's so reductive of Polynesian culture that it does a disservice and does damage to these communities, these oftentimes marginalized communities that we reduce and make simple so that we can consume their wares. This is a bad habit of any empire. But so we kept hitting dead ends, and finally, Scott Kakawa reached out to us and gave us illuminated a path for us. But that was some of the premise that got us excited about this. We're going to be there. We spend time there. Let's try to understand Hawaii crime fiction as true as we can. We don't want to gloss over it. We don't want to reduce it, and we don't want to make assumptions about our knowledge of it. We've made mistakes. We fucked up on the Brazil episode. I'm just going to say it. We had a featured review that was of somebody who was not a Brazilian writer. And I feel like that mistake is not something I wanted to make again. And we tried to clear that up this time around. So that raises the question, what is Hawaii Noir? But before we answer it, Kurt, anything you want to add to my sort of summation of our journey?
Well, no, not really. I think you covered it pretty well. I mean, I think it was a collaborative process to try to do that. I just to reiterate, how difficult it was in this case. I mean, time after time, we found reading lists that were essentially nothing but beach fiction, written by essentially mainland white people. It did take a little bit of digging this time to find these authors. And the interesting thing is, well, McKinney's book, The Tattoo, is published by Soho Press. A lot of this stuff is not published by mainstream publishers, or bigger publishers, I should say. And that's a shame, because this stands up, with as good as or better than a lot of the things we're seeing from mainstream publishing.
That's true. Mutual Publishing, which puts out most of his books, they're based in Korea, so we're not even in the same continent, and that's why his material is obscure, at least as I see it. I heard nothing of him until Scott brought him to our attention, and now I see that he has, he's been writing for 20 years. He's got 7, 8, 9 books, and they're good, and we had no idea, and neither did the noir people who culminate these lists of noir for all occasions, noir for people who like omelets, noir for people who walk dogs. Like, yeah. Okay, well, how about noir about Hawaii? No, we don't know. And so now we know, and we probably still only know part of it. I was gonna say, so what the hell is Hawaii Noir? If you could narrow it down to a couple sentences, what are the things that we found in these books that we've read?
Well, I think we can look at a lot of the things that we found during our Around the World tour as to why Hawaii certainly has some great noir fiction available if you dig for it, but it's also a great potential place for more crime and noir fiction. And it comes from, here we have as I said, it's a cultural melting pot of Native Hawaiians, Asian cultures, mainland Americans, all coming together in a fairly, I don't want to say confined, but a fairly small place. And there's a real blend of culture there. So that gives us an interesting place to have a story. It gives us conflict between cultures. It gives us conflict between economic opportunity, and it also has the allure of the sort of dark side of paradise look too, which we'll see more in Chris McKinney's work. So all of those things, really give you a potential for and political conflict too, as we mentioned earlier. But all of those things provide a perfect stew for good crime fiction.
I agree with those things. I think that the placement of Pearl Harbor military base, U.S. essentially the colonizing base of Hawaii, and Hawaii is a midway point between Asia and North America, and also the legacy of World War II and the legacy of Japanese internment, creating additional tensions in a culture where there's a lot of Asian influence and a lot of Japanese folk and Japanese Hawaiians. I feel like these things are like some of the other fires that are under the surface smoldering that could go off like a pop cork. But you mentioned confinement and then said, well, not quite confined. But I'm going to double down and say, absolutely, Hawaii is a place of confinement. You can, especially for crime fiction, because you can commit crimes, but unlike the great American plains, there's no outlet, there's no escape. You can, unless you have a boat, and we get boats in these stories for that reason. But so much of crime is about freedom. It's about making mistakes, but there's always opportunities elsewhere in the American crime tradition. And in Hawaii, you can go around in circles on the island and get nowhere. And so much of what even some of our lovable loser characters in these noirs is characters that go around in circles and go nowhere. They don't know what to do with themselves. They're trapped everywhere they see opportunity and other people and tourists having great times, but in their life they're on the small rock in the middle of the ocean, and the opportunities aren't there for them. And there's also the question of guns and how there's gun culture, but it's not in the same way. Like, you can rob a bank, but where are you going to fucking go? And there's just a different way that you approach crime and criminality, and when you're confined in such a way that escape is almost impossible.
Yeah, that's for sure. And I think I think, I don't know that there's a real need to talk about this for much longer, but I think we've really illustrated why it is such a good spot for just good fiction, really, in general. I did read another novel or two that I wouldn't really quite classify as crime fiction, but took place on the islands. And it's a good spot for good fiction, and especially some good crime fiction. So
we'll see that in our next episode when we revisit McKinney's Yakudoshi, and we're also going to we're going to do a featured review of Scott Kakawa's novel Kona Winds, which is a historical crime fiction set in the 50s in the wake of Pearl Harbor in World War II. And it features a Japanese detective who harbors those struggles and resentments and frustrations over how internment went and how Japanese-American relations were in the 50s. And so it's another approach to this tension that I think is going to be an interesting conversation. So,
yeah, for sure. So, well, I think we'll wrap it up there for today's episode, Justin, if you're good with that. And we will.
I am.
Okay, so we'll see you all next time.
Episode 47 is going to be Yakudoshi, Age of Calamity. This is by Chris McKinney. It came out a few years ago, and it's a short read. So if you have the cash flow, throw down $10 for that book, and it's 186 pages, so you should be ready for the episode.
Yeah, it sounds good, and it is a good one. So if you want to get in touch with the show, you can find us on Facebook at Point Blank, Hardboiled Noir and Detective Fiction. Best thing to do if you really want to talk to us is send us an email at pointblanknoir@gmail.com. And we will, next episode, we'll also be having a brief discussion about the future of the show as we come up on episode 50. And we have decided we're going to make a few changes, not really so much in content, but just how it's all presented. So we will see you, we'll see you next time.
We will see you then. Point Blank is under a Creative Commons license. Music is by Justin. Copywritten works are property of their respective holders.